r/relationship_advice. My son said love tap and I realized my boss was having an affair. #Chunk1, the moment everything clicked. I was halfway through brewing my third cup of coffee when my son's innocent voice cut through the white noise of the office and made my entire world tilt on its axis. Mommy, why was Mr. Henderson doing love taps with that lady? I froze, the coffee mug suspended in midair. My hand trembled slightly, not enough that anyone would notice, but enough that I felt it. Around me, the executive suite hummed with its usual morning rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the distant sound of a conference call happening behind closed doors. None of it seemed real anymore. It was Friday, 9:47 a.m., and I had just spent the last 45 minutes thinking my 6-year-old son was safely coloring in the break room while I handled his father's lack of child support and my boss's complete disregard for my professional competence. Take your child to work day. I'd almost left him home with my neighbor, but he'd been so excited, his dark eyes wide with anticipation, asking over and over if he could finally see where mommy works. I set the mug down carefully on my desk and turned to face him. Marcus sat in the chair I'd positioned next to my workspace, his little legs swinging because they didn't reach the floor, his picture from the break room still clutched in one small hand. He was wearing the Spider-Man shirt I'd found on sale last month, the one that had made him grin so big I'd felt something crack open in my chest. That shirt had cost money I didn't have, but I bought it anyway because being a single mother means constantly doing that math, need versus love, bills versus joy. What do you mean, baby? I kept my voice level. Casual. Like my internal organs weren't suddenly staging a hostile takeover of my nervous system. You know, the taps, Marcus said, looking at me like I was being dumb. 6-year-old logic is ruthless. Like what you do to me when I'm being silly? When you go, he tapped his knuckles gently against my arm in demonstration, like that. But they were doing it, like, a lot. And they were smiling funny. My throat went dry. I glanced toward Richard Henderson's office, my boss's office, the one with the glass walls that had always felt like an aquarium built specifically to showcase my inadequacy. Through the frosted glass, I could see a silhouette moving around. Just one. Everyone else was in the conference room for the morning briefing. Everyone except me, because Richard had told me to hold down the fort and keep the office running. As if I was a secretary, not a 40-year-old woman with 12 years of executive assistant experience and a promotion that was 3 years overdue. 3 years. Did you see who the lady was? I asked, and I was proud of how steady my voice sounded. That's the thing about being on the edge of financial catastrophe every single day, you learn to compartmentalize. You learn to ask the right questions without your voice shaking, even when your hands are shaking, even when your entire future is suddenly rotating on the axis of what a 6-year-old witnessed in a moment of innocent observation. Marcus screwed up his face, thinking hard. The pretty one with the red nails? She came and got him from his office. She had a folder. And then they went into that little room with no windows. The storage closet. Richard Henderson, my married boss, whose wife I'd met exactly once at the company holiday party 2 years ago, a thin woman with sad eyes who thanked me for taking care of her husband at work, had been taking women into the storage closet. And he'd been doing it on Take Your Child to Work Day, when the office was full of families, when there was less predictability, more chaos. That seemed significant, though I wasn't sure why yet. That's very observant, baby, I said, and I kissed the top of his head. His hair smelled like the cheap shampoo I bought at the discount store, and it broke my heart a little, the way it always did. You're such a smart boy. I steered him back toward the break room, found him another coloring sheet, and made sure he had juice and the good cookies that I kept stashed for him. Then I returned to my desk and sat in my ergonomic chair, the one I bought with my own money because the company-issued one gave me back pain, and I stared at my computer screen without actually seeing anything on it. My mind was doing the same thing it had been doing for months, calculating. Running the numbers. Weighing options. I made $58,000 a year. It looked decent on paper until you factored in childcare, $12,000, rent for my cramped 2-bedroom apartment, $18,000, insurance, food, utilities, and the occasional unexpected expense like the time Marcus needed dental work. I was one major crisis away from not being able to pay my bills. One job loss away from losing the apartment. One bad decision away from having to move back in with my mother in Ohio, and I would rather walk directly into traffic. Richard Henderson made approximately $340,000 a year, plus bonuses, plus stock options. He'd been promoted over me 3 times in the past 3 years. 3 times. The last time was 2 months ago. They'd given the senior executive vice president position to Kyle, who'd been here for 18 months and spent most of his time looking at his phone. I'd found out about my rejection while reading an internal memo, casually, while fetching Richard's dry cleaning. The humiliation of it had been a slow burn that hadn't gone out. It had been sitting in my chest like a coal, warming my rage every single morning when I showed up to a job where I was invisible, where I made other people look good while my own life collapsed in slow motion. And now I was sitting at my desk, and I knew something about my boss that I wasn't supposed to know. Something that mattered. Something that finally, for the first time in 3 years, gave me leverage. I looked over at Marcus in the break room, his small shoulders hunched over a coloring sheet, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way it always did when he was focused. He was so small. The world was so big and so unfair, and I was doing everything I could just to keep us both floating. The coal in my chest flared. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my phone. #Chunk2, the weight of knowing. My finger hovered over Richard's name in my contacts. I didn't call him often, most of our communication happened through email or in person, the way a boss and his assistant communicated in a corporate hierarchy. But his number was there, had been there for 12 years, ever since he'd hired me fresh out of community college with a diploma and a desperate need for steady work. I put the phone down. This was crazy. This was the kind of thing that got people fired, not promoted. I knew enough about how these things worked to understand that the messenger didn't come out of a scandal unscathed. If I said anything, if I leaked this information, if I did literally anything with what Marcus had told me, I would be the one with something to lose. My job. My apartment. My ability to provide for my son. The math was simple and merciless. But the other math was simpler still. I couldn't afford to stay silent. I closed my eyes and thought about Tuesday morning, 3 weeks ago, when Richard had called me into his office to discuss my performance. He'd kept me standing while he sat behind his desk, power play, the kind he probably didn't even realize he was doing anymore. He told me I seemed distracted lately and that the company might be better served by someone more dynamic in this role. Never mind that I'd reorganized his entire schedule system, reducing his meeting prep time by 40%. Never mind that I'd caught a $200,000 error in a vendor contract that he'd been about to sign. Never mind that I showed up early, stayed late, and somehow managed to be the adult in almost every interaction despite the fact that I was the one barely holding my life together. You seem tired, he'd said, and there was something in his tone that suggested tiredness was a character flaw. Like exhaustion was something only weak people experienced. I'd wanted to tell him that I was tired because I was doing the work of 2 people for the salary of 1. That I was tired because I'd been up until midnight helping Marcus with a school project, then up again at 5 a.m. to pack his lunch and get us both ready. That I was tired because I'd spent Sunday evening reorganizing my budget for the 15th time, trying to figure out how to save for the field trip permission slip he'd brought home while also not letting the electricity bill slide. Instead, I'd smiled and said, I'm fine. Just managing a lot. He nodded like he understood, but we both knew he didn't. Men like Richard Henderson didn't understand what it meant to manage on a margin so thin it was practically invisible. His wife probably had her own job, or a trust fund, or at minimum the luxury of not having to worry about whether she could afford new shoes for her kids when they outgrew the old ones. I opened my eyes and looked at my desk calendar. It was the free one from the bank, nothing fancy. Friday, April 12th. Just another day in the long sequence of days where I woke up and went to work and came home and tried to make it all work. Except it wasn't just another day anymore, was it? The question was what to do with what I knew. I pulled up my email and scrolled through the past 6 months of messages, scanning for anything that might be useful. Richard's calendar was shared with me, one of the perks and curses of being an executive assistant, and I could see his patterns. Thursday afternoons, he often blocked out 1:1 meetings from 2 to 3 p.m. Sometimes they appeared on his calendar, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes the location was listed as his office, sometimes it was blank. My stomach twisted. I was about to become the kind of person who paid attention to that. The kind of person who kept track. The kind of person who built a case. From the break room, I could hear Marcus laugh, a real, unfiltered kid laugh, and someone was laughing with him. One of the other employees, probably. People loved Marcus. He had that quality that made adults soften, made them want to be better versions of themselves. It was one of his superpowers, and it broke my heart because I knew the world was going to spend years trying to sand away that softness, trying to teach him that being small and innocent and trusting were vulnerabilities rather than strengths. I wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, can you call me tonight? Need to talk about something. My shoulders tensed automatically. My mother always needed to talk about something, and those conversations usually ended with her implying that I'd made poor choices, or that Marcus would be better off with her. She lived in a stable household, she had a husband, she had resources, or that I should have stayed with Marcus's father even though he'd made it clear he was interested in neither me nor his son. I didn't respond. I'd call her later if I had the energy. Another sound from the conference room, muffled laughter, the sound of the morning briefing wrapping up. People would start filtering back to their desk soon. Normal Friday. Normal day. The kind of day where nothing changed except everything had changed, and I was the only one who knew it. I started opening new browser tabs, carefully. I wasn't stupid about it, I knew that digital footprints could be traced. But I needed information. I needed to know who the red-nailed woman was. I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with before I made any decisions about what to do with it. The company directory loaded. I scrolled through the employee photos. There, Sarah Chan, marketing coordinator, hired 8 months ago. Pretty. Young. Early 20s, probably. Red nails in her photo. The kind of woman who would catch Richard's attention, which meant the kind of woman who was also probably vulnerable to his attention. I felt a pang of something, not quite sympathy, not quite rage. A mixture. I closed the browser and opened a document. Performance review notes, Q2, I typed, making it look like work. But underneath, I was starting to organize. Facts. Times. What Marcus had seen. The pattern of Richard's blocked calendar slots. I heard footsteps in the hallway. The conference room doors opening. Voices. In about 30 seconds, people would be walking past my desk. Richard would emerge from his office or appear from wherever he actually was. Everything would return to normal on the surface. But underneath, I was building something. I didn't know yet if it was a case or a catastrophe. I didn't know if I was being brave or reckless. I didn't know if this would save me or destroy me. What I did know was that I was tired of being invisible. Tired of being small. Tired of accepting that this was just how my life had to be. I saved the document and closed my laptop as the first person rounded the corner toward the executive suite. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Chunk 3. The weekend stretched ahead of me like a trap. I promised Marcus we'd go to the park on Saturday morning. It was our routine, the one thing I never canceled on, the anchor point of his week. But all I could think about was what I'd started on Friday afternoon. What I couldn't stop thinking about. What I definitely couldn't tell anyone about. By Saturday at 10 a.m., we were at Lincoln Park, and Marcus was hanging upside down from the monkey bars while I sat on a bench pretending to read a book I wasn't absorbing a single word from. My phone kept buzzing in my pocket. Messages from my mother, a reminder about a dental appointment, a notification about my checking account balance, dangerously low, as always. I ignored all of it and watched my son's face light up with the pure joy of being 6 and invincible. Mom, look how long I can stay up here. I see, baby. You're so strong. He dropped to the ground, already moving on to the next obstacle before I'd finished speaking. That was Marcus, always moving forward, always believing in his own resilience. I wondered when the world would teach him otherwise. A woman about my age sat down on the bench next to me, and I recognized her vaguely from the neighborhood. Her daughter was in Marcus's class at school. How are you? She asked, in that casual way neighbors do. Fine, I lied automatically. Just busy with work. Tell me about it. The hours are insane anymore, aren't they? She laughed, and there was genuine exhaustion in it. My boss has been on this kick where he wants everyone in the office more, even though half of us could do our jobs from home. I don't get it. Seems like he's just insecure. My throat tightened. Was that what Richard was? Insecure? He certainly acted like a man with something to prove, the designer watch, the way he name-dropped clients at lunch, the subtle digs he made at anyone who seemed too competent. Sarah Chan, probably, had seemed young and admiring. The perfect audience for a man trying to convince himself he was still relevant. Yeah, I said carefully. Some people are like that. I excused myself a few minutes later, claiming Marcus needed water. He didn't, he was perfectly fine, but I needed space. I needed air that wasn't filled with the casual intimacy of other people's problems. Sunday was worse because it was quiet. Marcus spent most of it at my mother's house. I'd finally called her back, and yes, she wanted to talk, which meant she'd cornered me into a visit. I had the apartment to myself for the first time in weeks, and instead of resting, I did what I'd been doing in every spare moment. I researched. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up LinkedIn. Sarah Chan's profile showed she'd been with the company for 8 months, just as I'd noted. Before that, she'd been an intern at another marketing firm. No college degree listed, but certifications in social media management and digital marketing. She looked even younger in the professional photo, almost childlike in her earnestness. There were photos of her with friends, at happy hours, at a hiking trail somewhere scenic. A normal young woman building a normal life, except she was also apparently making a very poor decision with a married man in his 50s. I opened Richard's LinkedIn. 14 years with the company. Before that, some smaller marketing firm. His profile picture was 3 years old. He'd been trying to hold on to that version of himself, the one with more hair, fewer lines. His wife's profile was private, but I found her on Facebook easily enough. Jennifer Henderson, 52, very blonde, very polished. She posted about charity galas and book clubs and her adult children. One post from 2 weeks ago, grateful for my partner in all things, with a photo of her and Richard at some event, his arm around her waist. She looked genuinely happy. I closed the browser and felt something sick unfurl in my stomach. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't about justice or corporate malfeasance. This was about a woman who still believed her marriage meant something, and a young woman who probably didn't understand what she was getting into, and a man who was counting on both of them never knowing the truth. And I was going to burn it all down. My phone rang at 8 p.m. My mother. You left Marcus here without his inhaler, she said without preamble. He had to use mine. We need to talk about your organization, honey. You're drowning. He has asthma, Mom. He should have it with him. Exactly. Which is why you need to be more careful. Look, I'm not trying to be mean, but I worry about you. About him. You're stretched so thin, and that job doesn't seem to be going anywhere. I've been thinking. Don't, I said quietly. Please don't start. Start what? I'm trying to help. Your father and I have discussed it, and if you wanted to move back home, we could help with childcare. You could get a less demanding job, something part-time, actually be present for him. The irony of her mentioning being present for him while suggesting I uproot everything was lost on her. It always was. I have to go, I said. We're just worried about. I hung up. Monday morning came too fast. I drove to work in a fog, my mind running through scenarios. If I leaked information about Richard's affair, who would believe me? Who would care? Jennifer might care. The board might care if it affected the company's reputation. HR definitely would care, though they'd probably be more interested in liability than in Richard's infidelity per se. And Sarah. Sarah Chen would have her life blown apart, too. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in my car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. There was still time to back out. To forget what Marcus had said, to let this be someone else's problem. To survive another year, another 5 years, another decade doing Richard's work for a fraction of his pay. But that wasn't surviving. That was just slowly disappearing. I gathered my bag, checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, and walked into the building. Richard was already in his office when I arrived, reviewing something on his computer. He looked up and smiled at me, that distant, slightly distracted smile of a man who doesn't really see you. Morning, he said. Can you reorganize my calendar? I've got some recurring items I want to move around. Of course, I said, and I meant it. I'd reorganize his calendar. I'd organize everything. I'd organize it so carefully that when it all fell apart, there would be no question about how it happened. His calendar synced to my computer. I opened it and studied the pattern of blocked time slots again. Then I pulled out my phone and composed a message to an email address I'd found over the weekend. Jennifer Henderson's work email. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I stared at the draft message like it was a live grenade in my hands. #chunk4. The draft message sat in my compose window for 3 days. I didn't send it. I also didn't delete it. Every morning I'd open it, read the words I'd carefully chosen, and close it again. It felt like holding my breath, sustainable for a moment, but eventually, you have to either exhale or pass out. By Wednesday, Richard had me schedule a meeting with the board about restructuring the marketing department. The meeting was set for the following Monday. I knew what that meant, layoffs. Budget cuts. And probably, given the way he'd been acting lately, a way to consolidate power and justify why certain people, like me, didn't deserve promotions. It was classic Richard, create a crisis, position himself as the problem solver, emerge with more authority and more resources. I was typing up the meeting agenda when Sarah Chen walked past my desk. She was wearing a new blouse, navy with tiny white dots, and her hair was different, softer, I think, or maybe just styled in a way that suggested someone had run their fingers through it recently. She was humming. Actually humming. The casual contentment of a young woman who thought she was in love. I had to look away. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus's school, a reminder that Thursday was the spring field trip to the Science Museum. I'd signed the permission slip, paid the $15 fee, which I debated for an hour, calculating whether I could spare it. Marcus had been talking about the planetarium show for weeks. I texted back, confirmed. Then I pulled up my bank account on my computer, something I did about 15 times a day out of pure anxiety. The balance was sitting at $847.32. Rent was due in 10 days. That was $1,200. I had 3 more paychecks before then, which meant I'd clear it, but barely. And then there was groceries, utilities, Marcus's inhaler refill, the car insurance that was due next month. Every number was a tightrope I was walking with a 6-year-old on my shoulders. This was why I couldn't afford to lose my job. And this was why I couldn't afford to let Richard keep blocking my promotion. Around noon, I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. This had become my thing, a moment of privacy in the only place in the building where I could actually be alone. I sat on the closed toilet seat and opened my phone again, pulling up the draft message. Dear Miss Henderson. Asterisk, I'm writing to you because I believe you deserve to know the truth about your husband's relationship with someone at his office. I have direct knowledge of an inappropriate relationship that has been ongoing for several months. I'm providing you with this information in confidence, and I'm happy to discuss it further if you'd like to meet asterisk. I understand this may be difficult to hear, and I'm reaching out as someone who believes honesty matters. It was carefully worded. Not accusatory. Not threatening. Just informative. The kind of message a concerned stranger might send. The kind of message that couldn't be traced back to me if I used a burner email. Except Jennifer Henderson would be an idiot if she couldn't figure out it came from Richard's office. And if she decided to confront him, and if he decided to investigate, it wouldn't take much to narrow it down to me. I was the only one who knew his schedule intimately enough to know when he and Sarah were disappearing together. I flushed the toilet, for appearances, and went back to my desk. Richard was on a call when I returned. I could see him through his glass office walls, gesturing animatedly. He was talking to someone on the phone, his body language all confidence and charm. He caught me looking and winked. Actually winked. Like we were in on something together. Like I was complicit in whatever version of himself he was selling to whoever was on the other end of that line. I turned back to my computer and pulled up the meeting agenda again. Added a line item, Q2 marketing performance review. Neutral. Professional. The kind of thing that might get Richard thinking about his performance metrics, his reputation, his standing with the board. At 3 p.m., my mother called. Again. Hi, Mom, I said, keeping my voice pleasant. I was at my desk, I couldn't really talk. I just wanted to check on Marcus. After the inhaler incident, I want to make sure he's okay. He's fine, Mom. Kids forget things. It happens. It shouldn't happen when it comes to his medical equipment. He could have had a serious attack. The implication hung there, asterisk, you're a bad mother. You can't keep track of your own child's necessities, asterisk. He's going on a field trip tomorrow, I said, changing the subject. To the Science Museum. He's really excited. That's nice. Do you have time to help him prepare? Maybe go over what he might see, talk about the planets. He'll figure it out, I said, and I could hear the edge in my own voice. He's curious. He'll explore. There was a pause. My mother did pauses very well. Pauses that communicated disappointment without words. Okay, she said finally. I'll let you go. But honey, think about what I said about moving back home. It's not a failure to ask for help. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, staring at my computer screen. The cursor blinked in the meeting agenda, waiting for me to add something. Waiting for me to move forward. Richard emerged from his office around 4:30, his jacket slung over his arm. He was leaving early again. Probably meeting Sarah somewhere. Probably telling her he had a late meeting, or a client dinner, or something that required him to disappear into the afternoon and evening. I'm heading out, he called to me. I've got a networking thing. If anything urgent comes up, handle it. Of course I would handle it. I always handled it. I watched him walk toward the elevator, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to send the draft message to Jennifer Henderson. But I was going to do something else instead. I pulled up my email, created a new account, one Richard would never be able to trace to me, and sent myself copies of everything. His calendar with the blocked time slots. Screenshots of him and Sarah in the office, their body language, the unmistakable intimacy of two people who were far more than colleagues. An email chain from 3 months ago where he'd promised Sarah a promotion that he was currently denying me. I organized it all in a folder on an encrypted cloud drive. I created another folder with documentation of every time Richard had assigned me work and taken credit for it, every project I'd led that never made it to my resume, every promise he'd broken about my advancement. This was different from the message to Jennifer. This was ammunition. This was leverage. This was me taking control of the situation instead of letting the situation control me. My hands were shaking as I worked, but for the first time in months, it wasn't from anxiety. It was from something else entirely. It was from knowing that the ground beneath Richard Henderson was about to shift, and I was the one shifting it. #Chunk5. Thursday morning came with a sick feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the coffee I'd skipped. Marcus was excited about the field trip, bouncing around the apartment while I helped him get dressed, his asthma inhaler carefully placed in his backpack along with his lunch. I'd triple-checked it. The inhaler had become a symbol of every way I felt I was failing him, so I made sure it was there like I was checking for a vital organ. Mom, is the planetarium really as big as our whole school? He asked, tugging on my sleeve. Bigger, I said, and I meant it. It's the size of a whole building, and you're going to feel so small inside it. He grinned at that, and something in my chest twisted. This was what it was all about, wasn't it? Not the promotion or Richard or even the money, though God knew I needed the money. It was this. Marcus excited about learning something new. Marcus trusting that I was taking care of him. I dropped him off at school and headed to the office, my encrypted folder sitting invisibly on my phone like a loaded gun in my pocket. All morning, I kept expecting something to shift. For Richard to come storming out of his office. For someone to call me in and ask if I'd been accessing his calendar. For the digital footprints I'd been so careful to cover to suddenly materialize. Nothing happened. Richard arrived at 9:15 a.m. with his coffee and his phone already to his ear, barking at someone about the board meeting scheduled for Monday. The restructuring meeting. The moment where he'd probably announce layoffs and blame it on market conditions, when really it was just Richard consolidating his empire. Sarah came in at 9:47 a.m. I I knew the exact time because I was watching the clock like I always did. She was carrying a folder, something about the spring campaign, and she made a beeline for Richard's office. He waved her in without closing the glass door. They were being careful now, though not careful enough. Careful in the way people are when they think they're invisible, when they think no one's paying attention. Around 11 a.m., my mother texted me a photo of a house listing. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, in her neighborhood. With a note, just thinking of you. There's a good school district here. I didn't respond. I couldn't engage with the fantasy of moving home, of admitting defeat, of letting my mother prove once again that she'd been right about me the whole time. That I couldn't do this alone. That I needed her. Lunch came and went. I ate a sandwich at my desk while monitoring Richard's calendar. He had a meeting at 2 p.m. with someone I didn't recognize, something external, someone from outside the office. That was unusual. Richard kept his affairs compartmentalized. He wouldn't risk bringing an outside party into his messy internal situation unless it was something big. At 1:55 p.m., the man arrived, early 50s, expensive suit, the kind of presence that made my receptionist sit up straighter. He asked for Richard, and I watched as he was escorted back to the glass office. Then Richard did something I'd never seen before. He closed the blinds. My heart started racing. This was different. This was Richard being cautious about something other than his affair. I couldn't hear what they were discussing, but I could see Richard's body language, tense, animated, occasionally running a hand through his hair. The man across from him remained calm, which somehow made it worse. The meeting lasted 37 minutes. When the man left, Richard didn't return to his desk. He stayed in his office, door closed, blinds still drawn. I could see his silhouette pacing. My phone buzzed at 3:12 p.m. A message from Marcus's school, marked urgent. Marcus had a breathing difficulty during the field trip. We administered his rescue inhaler and he stabilized, but we're recommending he see his pediatrician for a checkup. He's resting in the nurse's office now. You can pick him up early if you'd like. My blood went cold. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward, hitting the wall. I grabbed my purse, and I was halfway out of my chair when I heard Richard's office door open. Sarah, in my office. Now. It wasn't the voice he used for her usually, that low, intimate tone. This was his work voice. His power voice. Sarah, who'd been typing something at her desk, went pale. I watched as she stood, smoothed her blouse, and walked into his office like someone heading to their execution. The blinds closed again. I had 2 choices, stay and find out what was happening, or leave to get Marcus. There was no version of this where I did both. I couldn't be in 2 places at once, couldn't split myself down the middle and cover all my bases. I left. The drive to Marcus's school felt like it took hours, though it was only 15 minutes. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The breathing difficulty. The inhaler. The nurse's office. Each phrase was a small failure stacking on top of all the other small failures. Marcus was sitting in the nurse's office when I arrived, looking small and tired in a chair too big for him. His eyes lit up when he saw me, which broke my heart because he shouldn't have to be relieved to see me. He should never be scared I wouldn't come. Hey, buddy, I said, keeping my voice light. Field trip was a little too much, huh? I was okay, he said quickly. I was looking at the stars and I couldn't breathe like normal. But they gave me my inhaler and it was fine. The school nurse, a kind-looking woman named Patricia, explained that he'd recovered quickly, that there were no signs of a serious attack, that sometimes excitement and exertion could trigger symptoms. She recommended the pediatrician visit, but she didn't seem overly alarmed. I thanked her, signed whatever forms needed signing, and drove Marcus home in silence. He fell asleep in the car, his small head tilted against the window, his breathing steady. Back at the apartment, I laid him in bed still in his clothes and checked his inhaler supply. 3/4 full. Enough. I'd need to refill it soon, but enough for now. Then I sat on the couch, my hands shaking, and I realized something that should have been obvious all along. I was in control of exactly nothing. I had organized my encrypted folders and gathered my evidence and convinced myself that leverage was power. But I didn't have leverage. Richard did. He had the promotion I needed. He had the job that kept my son fed and housed. He had the authority to fire me, to destroy my career, to make sure I never worked in this industry again. And I had a folder full of secrets that I was too terrified to actually use. My phone buzzed. An email notification. From Richard's email. Sent to the entire department. Restructuring update. Please join us Monday at 9 a.m. for an important announcement about departmental changes. Come prepared to discuss your roles and contributions to the team. It was the meeting. The restructuring. The announcement. It was coming, and I was sitting here with a sick son and a sick feeling in my stomach, and nothing I'd done, none of it, had actually changed anything. #chunk6. The email sat on my screen like a taunt. I read it 3 times, looking for subtext that probably wasn't there. Come prepared to discuss your roles and contributions to the team. What did that mean? Was it a standard restructuring email, or was Richard sending me a message? Did he know I'd been digging? Had someone tipped him off? I closed my laptop and went to check on Marcus. He was still asleep, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. I pressed my hand against his back anyway, that old nervous habit, just to feel him breathing. The inhaler sat on his nightstand in its blue plastic casing. How many times had I done this? Checked on him while he slept like he might stop breathing if I wasn't there to witness it? My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Saw you didn't respond about the house. Call me. I'm worried about you. I didn't call. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table in the dark and did something I hadn't let myself do in months. I opened the encrypted folder and scrolled through everything I'd gathered. Photos of Richard and Sarah's hands almost touching across a lunch table. Screenshots of deleted calendar entries. The hotel receipt. The credit card charge for flowers sent to an address that wasn't his home. It was damning. It was absolutely damning. It was also sitting on my phone like a live wire, waiting for me to touch it with the wrong emotion at the wrong moment and electrocute myself. The thing about leverage, I realized, was that it only worked if you were willing to use it. And using it meant risk. Using it meant that on Monday morning, I wouldn't just be walking into a restructuring meeting, I'd be walking into a situation where Richard knew exactly what I'd done and exactly why I'd done it. He'd have time to prepare his narrative. He'd have the weekend to lawyer up, to call in favors, to spin whatever story would protect him. And worse, I'd have used my only card, and I'd have no way of knowing if it was actually strong enough to win. I opened my work email instead and started typing a response to Richard's restructuring announcement. I had to keep up appearances. I had to make sure he didn't suspect anything was different about today, about me, about the fact that I now possessed information that could destroy him. Looking forward to Monday's meeting, I wrote, and then deleted it. Too enthusiastic. I'll be there, I tried instead. Better. Neutral. The kind of thing an employee who wasn't actively plotting would say. I sent it. Immediately, I wanted to take it back. What if the tone was wrong? What if he could read something into those 4 words that I didn't intend? But that was paranoia. That was the kind of thinking that would paralyze me completely if I let it. Around midnight, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Ms. Chen? This is Dr. Patel from Riverside Pediatrics. I have an opening tomorrow afternoon if you'd like to bring Marcus in for that asthma checkup. The school sent over his recommendation. Relief washed over me. An actual appointment. A real step toward making sure my son was okay. Yes, please. What time? 2 o'clock? The restructuring meeting was at 9 a.m. By 2 p.m., I might know exactly where I stood. Whether Richard was going to fire me or promote me or pretend everything was fine. Perfect, I said. We'll be there. After I hung up, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about that moment in Richard's office when he'd called Sarah in. The shift in his voice. The way he'd closed the blinds. What had that been about? What conversation had been serious enough to warrant privacy? Unless the man in the expensive suit had been someone from HR. Or legal. Or the board. Unless Richard had already known something was wrong. My stomach twisted. What if this wasn't about me at all? What if Richard's entire world was already collapsing, and I was about to light a match in a building that was already on fire? At 5:47 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, pulling up the company's public filings. I'd never done this before, never looked at the actual financial data, but it was all there for shareholders to see. And what I found made my mouth go dry. 3/4 of declining revenue. A major client loss in Q2 that they buried in the footnotes. Rumors online in industry forums about leadership instability. And then, tucked into an SEC filing from 2 weeks ago, a note about an ongoing investigation into accounting irregularities. An investigation. Not a restructuring. An investigation. My hands were shaking as I scrolled further. The investigation was attributed to an unnamed whistleblower. Someone internal. Someone who had reported the irregularities to the board. Someone who had enough evidence to trigger a formal SEC inquiry. I called the office. The after-hours voicemail picked up. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I sat in the pre-dawn darkness and let the pieces fall into place. Richard wasn't consolidating his empire. He was being investigated for fraud. The restructuring meeting wasn't about layoffs, it was probably about damage control, about getting ahead of the story, about preparing statements for the board. And the man in the expensive suit? Probably an investigator. Or Richard's lawyer. Or both. Which meant that my encrypted folder of affair evidence wasn't leverage at all. It was a distraction. Richard's affair was small potatoes compared to what else might be going on. Using it now would be like throwing a rock at a window when the house was already burning down. But it also meant something else. I didn't need to be the one to destroy Richard. He was already destroying himself. The question was whether I should let him, or whether I should speed up the process. And the other question, the one that kept me awake as dawn broke gray and thin over the city, was whether Marcus's asthma attack yesterday was really just excitement and exertion, or whether it was my fault. Whether the stress I was carrying, the weight of all my secrets and schemes, had somehow transmitted itself to him through the air he breathed. At 7:15 a.m., Marcus woke up. He came into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing his eyes, and climbed into my lap like he still could, even though he was getting too big. We have a doctor's appointment today, I told him. Am I sick? He asked. No, buddy. Just a checkup. To make sure you're okay after yesterday. He nodded against my chest, and I held him there, breathing in the smell of his hair, and tried not to think about the fact that in less than 2 hours, I was going to walk into that restructuring meeting and have to pretend everything was normal. I had no idea what I was going to do. #Chunk7. The restructuring meeting was in a conference room I'd never been in before. That was the first thing that made my stomach drop. Richard always held his important meetings in the executive suite on the 4th floor, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the marble table that cost more than my car. This was the 3rd-floor conference room. The one with no windows and industrial carpet that smelled faintly of old coffee. There were more people than I expected. Richard sat at the head of the table, but he looked different. Smaller, somehow. His tie was the same expensive silk he always wore, but there was a tremor in his hands when he reached for the water pitcher. Sarah wasn't there. I noticed that immediately, and then I noticed that a woman I didn't recognize was sitting directly across from me, with a leather portfolio and a small digital recorder positioned at her elbow. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Richard began, and his voice had that same careful quality it had when he was lying to clients on the phone. As you know, we've been experiencing some significant operational challenges lately. Today we're here to discuss restructuring and transition planning. Transition planning. Not layoffs. Transition. The woman across from me introduced herself as Michelle from HR. Not the Richards having an affair conversation that I'd expected. Not an investigation briefing. Just Michelle from HR with her recorder and her neutral expression. We're going to be moving some responsibilities around, Michelle continued, pulling out a folder. We've conducted a comprehensive review of departmental contributions, and we've identified some areas where we need to make strategic changes. I waited for my name. For the part where this became about me and my overdue promotion and the fact that I'd been passed over twice while Richard hired his golf buddies' kids into senior positions. It didn't come. Instead, Michelle outlined a new organizational structure. Richard would be taking on a special advisory role effective immediately. His direct reports would be distributed among 3 other executives, none of whom I worked closely with. Sarah's name wasn't mentioned at all. It was like she'd been erased from the company org chart entirely. What about my position? I finally asked, when Michelle started distributing printed copies of the new structure. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. Where do I fall in this? Michelle's eyes flicked to Richard, then back to me. That was when I knew something was very wrong. That's actually one of the reasons we wanted to meet with you specifically, Michelle said carefully. Your performance reviews have been excellent. Consistently excellent. You've been flagged by multiple executives as essential to your department's operations. But here it comes, I thought. But. However, Michelle continued, and there was the but, we've had concerns raised about, she paused, choosing her words. About the scope of your recent activities and how they might have affected your work. My mouth went dry. What activities? Ms. Chen, we're going to be very frank with you. Michelle leaned forward slightly. On Friday morning, we received a complaint from an employee regarding your conduct. Specifically, that you had been accessing personnel files and gathering private information about your coworkers without authorization. That you had been in the executive offices after hours, and that there were concerns about what you might have been photographing or recording. The room tilted slightly. Sarah. It had to be Sarah. She'd seen me, or she'd suspected, or... No. Wait. No, this was wrong. This didn't make sense. Sarah was the one having the affair. She was the one with something to hide. Unless she'd reported me first. Unless she'd recognized the threat and neutralized it before I could even deploy my evidence. I haven't done anything illegal, I said, and it was technically true. Taking photos of people in a public office space wasn't illegal. Noting down schedule patterns wasn't illegal. Finding a hotel receipt wasn't. We're not accusing you of anything illegal, Michelle said, her voice taking on that soft tone that made it clear she was absolutely accusing me of something. But we are concerned about the foundation of trust. We're concerned about judgment. And we're concerned about whether your employment with this company continues to serve the best interests of either party. That was when I realized what was happening. This wasn't an investigation into Richard. This was Richard, or whoever was controlling Richard right now, getting ahead of my story by making me the problem. By framing my evidence gathering as unstable obsession. As harassment. As an employee with poor judgment and boundary issues. I want to speak to an attorney, I said. Of course, Michelle said, and she sounded almost sympathetic. That's absolutely you're right. We would recommend you consult with someone about the details of your severance package and separation agreement. Severance. Separation. The words felt like they were hitting me from underwater. You can't fire me for. You'll receive 3 weeks' pay as severance, Michelle continued, sliding a document across the table. In addition, we're offering an outplacement service and a letter of reference. A reference from who? Richard? I looked at him directly for the first time since the meeting started. He was staring at the table. He couldn't even meet my eyes. He's been blocking my promotion for months. The reference will come from me, on behalf of HR, Michelle said. It will note your technical competence and your organizational skills. That should be sufficient for most employers. Should be. Not would be. Should be. I stood up. I don't remember deciding to stand, but suddenly I was on my feet and the room was too small and too hot and I couldn't breathe in the right way. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to be the one in control. I was supposed to hold the evidence and make the demands and finally be the person who wasn't pushed around. Instead, I'd been outmaneuvered so completely that I didn't even see it coming. The letter of reference will be helpful, Michelle was saying, but I understand you might feel the need to explore other options as well. You'll have 60 days to decide whether you want to sign the separation agreement. During that time, you're welcome to take personal leave. Or you can come in and work your notice period, whatever you're comfortable with. Comfortable. I wanted to laugh at that word. What about my benefits? I heard myself ask, and it was the practical part of my brain taking over. The part that had learned, long ago, to think about survival when everything else was falling apart. Marcus's insurance. You'll be covered through the end of the month, Michelle said. After that, we'd recommend exploring Cobra or finding coverage through another employer. I looked down at the document in front of me. 3 weeks of pay. The letter of reference. The separation agreement with all its legal language about non-disparagement clauses and confidentiality. It was clean. It was professional. It was how they were going to make sure I couldn't tell anyone what Richard had done, because I'd be too busy trying to explain why I'd been fired for conduct issues. Marcus had his doctor's appointment in 3 hours. I needed to figure out how I was going to tell him that his mother, who'd been telling him all his life that standing up to bullies was the right thing to do, had just learned that lesson in the most brutal way possible. I picked up the document and walked out of the conference room without saying another word. #Chunk8, reckoning. The walk to my car felt like moving through molasses. My legs worked, my body moved forward, but I wasn't really inhabiting any of it. I was outside myself, watching a woman in a navy blazer carry a manila folder to a beat-up Honda Civic in the company parking lot. That woman was me, but it didn't feel true. I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes without turning on the engine. The separation agreement lay on the passenger seat, accusatory and final. 3 weeks of pay wouldn't even cover rent and Marcus's asthma medication, let alone insurance. I'd have to find another job immediately, which meant updating my resume, which meant calling people for references, which meant explaining to potential employers why I'd left a 5-year position so suddenly. And I couldn't even tell them the truth. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, *, how was the meeting? Did you get the promotion? *. I stared at those question marks. My mother, who'd been asking me for 6 months when I was going to finally get what I deserved. My mother, who'd raised me to fight back, to stand up, to not let people walk over me. I'd learned her lessons too well. Now I was sitting in a parking lot, unemployed, with a non-disparagement clause preventing me from telling anyone what had actually happened. I drove to pick up Marcus from school. I had 3 hours before his doctor's appointment, which was good because I needed to figure out how to tell him that I'd lost my job. When he bounded into the car with his Spider-Man backpack and his gap-toothed grin, I almost broke. Almost. Instead, I took a breath and asked him about his day, and he told me about the science project on ecosystems and how Jake Mitchell had been mean about his drawings. And I listened, and I held it together, because that was what I'd always done. That night, after I'd tucked him in and made sure his inhaler was on the nightstand, I sat on my bed and let myself look at my phone. I'd never sent the evidence to Richard's wife. I'd never contacted the board. Instead, I'd been so focused on the revenge narrative, the moment where I'd finally triumph, that I hadn't thought through what would actually happen when you try to take down someone with more power than you have. I thought about Sarah, whoever she really was to Richard. Had she turned him in preemptively, or had Richard figured it out himself and gotten ahead of me? Either way, someone had played the game better than I had, and I'd lost. At 2 a.m., I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my mother. "It's late," she said, but her voice was immediately alert. "What happened?" So I told her. All of it. The promotion, the affair, the plan, the meeting. I told her about the severance agreement and the non-disparagement clause and the way Richard wouldn't even look at me. I expected her to be angry. To tell me I should have gone through with it, that I should have fought harder. Instead, she was quiet for a long moment. "What did you learn?" she finally asked. "That I'm an idiot?" I said bitterly. "That I got outmaneuvered?" "No," my mother said. "That you tried to play a game you were never going to win by those rules. Listen to me, sweetheart. I taught you to stand up to bullies. I was wrong about one thing." "What?" "I didn't teach you that sometimes the bully has more pieces on the board. Sometimes standing up doesn't mean you win. Sometimes it just means you lose differently than you would have otherwise." I felt something crack open in my chest. "So what am I supposed to do?" "You're going to do what you've always done," my mother said quietly. "You're going to survive. You're going to take that 3 weeks of pay and that reference letter, and you're going to find another job. You're going to be the best employee that company has ever seen. And then, when you've built something they can't take from you, you'll do whatever you want." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. And then I opened my laptop and did something I should have done months ago. I started looking for other jobs. The next 3 months were brutal. I worked my notice period, which meant showing up to the office and pretending everything was normal while everyone speculated about why Richard suddenly had a special advisory role and why Sarah had mysteriously transferred to another division and why I was leaving. The rumors were absolutely wild. Some people thought Richard had been caught taking bribes. Others whispered about Sarah having an affair with someone higher up. No one guessed the truth, or if they did, they kept it to themselves. That was the thing about corporate scandals. There were always enough pieces to the puzzle that people could construct whatever narrative felt most satisfying. I interviewed at 7 different companies. Got rejected at 4, made it to final rounds at 3. At the second final round, the hiring manager, a woman named Patricia who'd built her own division from the ground up, asked me why I was leaving my current position. I realized, I said carefully, that I was trying to solve problems that weren't mine to solve. I was focused on proving something that didn't need to be proven. I'm looking for a company where I can do my job without getting caught up in other people's mess. Patricia hired me on the spot. The new position paid $8,000 more per year than I'd been making. It came with better health insurance and a boss who actually listened to my ideas. More importantly, it came with space to breathe. With distance. With the knowledge that I'd survived something and come out the other side. 2 weeks before I started, I took Marcus to his doctor's appointment. His asthma had been stable for months. The doctor asked him if he'd been standing up for himself at school, and Marcus, proud, fierce little Marcus, said yes. He told Jake Mitchell that his drawings were cool, actually, and if Jake didn't think so, that was Jake's problem. On the drive home, Marcus asked me a question. "Mom, why did you tell me to stand up to bullies if it's so hard?" I thought about my mother's words. About the rules of the game. About what it meant to actually win. Because, I said, sometimes standing up to bullies means you lose the battle. But you don't lose yourself. And that matters more than being right. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about this philosophy like only a 6-year-old can. "Does that mean you won?" he finally asked. I looked at him in the rearview mirror, his serious little face, his determination, and I realized that yes. Yes, I had. Maybe not the way I'd planned. But I had. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I think it does."